Cassandra Cain. One of the most unique and interesting additions to the Batman family. The daughter of assassins David Cain and Lady Shiva, she was bred from birth to be a killer. Instead, she left that life behind and became Batgirl. In fact, she became so important to Batman that he actually adopted her. McFarlane Toys has finally given us a Cassandra Cain Batgirl as part of the DC Multiverse series, but is she worth the wait? Stick around and find out. Welcome to 5 points of articulation. Starting with the packaging, and there's one thing that none of us ever want to see on a DC Multiverse box: the gold label. It means that what's in the box is exclusive and hard to get. On the other hand, it's wonderful to finally see Cassandra Cain's name on a DC Multiverse box. This apparently comes from the Batgirl's comic. I'm guessing whoever pitched that comic just wrote Batgirl on a whiteboard and then put a $ sign at the end like James Cameron selling Aliens. For those who want to waste their time, try their luck in stores, here's the barcode, and on the back is some really nice artwork of Cassandra Cain. Seriously, that cityscape is gorgeous. This particular image comes from the cover of Batgirl Redemption Road Chapter 1. It's an interesting choice because of one detail we'll be talking about in presentation. Well, one of a couple. Even so, it gives us a great clear image of the character, and for packaging, I'm giving Cassandra Cain 5 points. Moving on to presentation, and the top of her scalp, Cassandra comes to 6 3/4. But to the tips of her ears, she comes to 7. As the two major Batgirl figures, she's a combination of Art of the Crime and 3 Jokers. Instead of giving her a new belt, McFarlane has just reused the Art of the Crime one. It does make sense because this belt has pouches, just not, big enough for Cassandra. A perfect example of this is the original DC Direct figure. In the comic, the pouch belt was portrayed as being much too big for her, visualizing that she's pretty much a kid having to grow into the role. Don't get me wrong, I understand that reuse is the name of the game for action figures, especially for things like store exclusives. Also, that cape ain't gonna pay for itself. But even something as small as choosing other pre-existing parts would have gone a long way. Using 3 Jokers' forearms, for example, or the boots. Instead of using 3 Jokers, they decided to reuse Art of the Crimes, giving Cassandra these spiky bits coming out of the back of her heel. For my only other major criticism of this figure, and we have to talk about the logo. In the specific artwork that they used on the box, it's gray with a gold outline, but that's not emblematic of what it looked like in the comic. In the comic, it was nothing but a gold outline. Again, it's accurate to the box, just not what she normally looks like. The sculpt for that logo, by the way, came from 3 Jokers, but going back to Cassandra, and notice the extra seam lines that they added. That's so it can line up with the seam lines on the abs. The abs, by the way, which were taken from Art of the Crime. Now, to McFarlane's credit, this is a lot better than what they did with Supergirl, proving that they have listened to criticism and adapted, but just having all these extraneous details is still a bit frustrating. That said, there are a couple of things about this figure that do almost make up for all of my criticisms. The newly sculpted head and wired posable cape. From a functional standpoint, I'll be talking more about the cape and playability, but for now let me just say I really like how it's cut. The fabric is good and not too see-through, and again, I'm very pleased with this portrait. Cassandra was never taught to speak and could only read body language. Though she did eventually learn to read and write and talk, the stitched up covered mouth symbolizes her silence. By no means is this Batgirl a bad figure, but with a couple of different reused part choices, a couple of new parts, and at least one significant paint difference, she could have been a great figure. As is, for presentation, I'm giving this Cassandra 3 points. Moving on to posability, and it occurs to me I don't think I've ever formally looked at one of these Batgirl bodies before. From the top, and naturally Cassandra's head's on a dumbbell joint, she can look up this high, which is pretty good, and this far down. Pretty decent tilt, and all the way around. Moving on down, she can raise her arm up this high, and thanks to the wibbly-wobbly rotator cuff, she can move that arm all over the place. Traversing down the arm, and she has bicep swivel, double jointed elbow with a very deep end, and McFarlane-style wrist balls that can swivel and hinge either up or down, or side to side. Moving to the middle, and Cassandra has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. Putting her arms back 90 degrees, we can see that she tilts about 45, and this far forward, which for McFarlane isn't that bad. Of course, she does get a very very good amount of tilt, and of course twist. Below the dubious utility belt, and she has McFarlane style hips. She's got a very impressive kick, and a perfect split. Moving down the leg though, and she has a pretty decent amount of twist in her hip. Double knee with a nice deep bend, and older school McFarlane ankles that can swivel, hinge, and like Cassandra shifting from child assassin to guardian of Gotham, pivot. Now obviously the cape is also posable, but I think of this more as a play feature than an articulation point, so we'll be talking about it in playability. Not surprisingly, and for posability, I'm giving Cassandra Cain 5 points. Moving on to playability, and hands down this is the best part of this figure. As usual, Cassandra has a trading card and figure stand, and if you want to read what it says, pause here. Otherwise, she comes with a shiny gold batarang and a pretty spiffy grapnel gun. These are also reused from Art of the Crime. I'm actually pretty impressed that McFarlane went in and painted the silver on this, especially given that they did not do that for the JLA Batman that we just looked at. Not having any fists, she can hold that in either hand. On that note, given her battle prowess, a pair of fists would have been appreciated. And I'm not kidding about her battle prowess. Cassandra's actually beaten Batman in a fight. That said, this Batgirl's greatest play feature is her posable wired cape. And just look at that wingspan. Wired capes are a feature we normally associate from higher-end companies like Mezco or Mafex. NECA was the first domestic mass-market company to give us one. McFarlane is, however, the first domestic company to make it available for such a low price point, which is worth celebrating. Although it's probably more of a conversation for price, the fact that we can get this much for this little is really awesome. Of course, playability is more than just accessories or wired capes. It's also about how well your figure plays with others. Starting with other Batgirls, and once again, here's the DC Direct first appearance Cassandra, the DC Direct Alex Ross Justice version of Barbara, as well as New 52 and Greg Capullo versions of Barbara. Moving over to McFarlane, and once again, here we have Art of the Crime and 3 Jokers. Otherwise, it occurs to me that thanks to the gold accents, the Batman Family 5-pack version might be a better match. That said, for a couple of purple options, and here we have DC Essentials and Gotham Knights. For one that I always seem to forget that I have, and here's Batwoman Beyond. I brought her out this time so I could show you this head swap. As the daughter of Lady Shiva, she should probably look a bit more Asian, but given that Cassandra's only half Japanese, I think you could get away with this. For the rest of the Batman family, and here we have Mattel and McFarlane versions of Tim Drake, Mattel and McFarlane versions of Damian, Better Than Batman and Titans versions of Nightwing, and New 52 and 3 Jokers versions of the Red Hood. As for the head of the Bat family, the Dark Knight himself, and Cassandra's greatest inspiration, here we have Batman. For a couple of black and gray options, and here's Rebirth and 3 Jokers. Looking at the Rebirth logo, and it kind of makes you wonder if Bruce was inspired by Cassandra the way that he inspired her. For a couple of blue and gray options though, and here we have Nightfall and Hush. But for the Batman that was closest to what he looked like when Cassandra debuted, and here we have my Kit Bash. It combines the body from the Spawn 2-pack with my modified head from the Hush 2-pack. You can learn more about that from this video, which I'll have linked at the end of this one. For just a few villains, and here we have Rebirth and Clown versions of the Joker, Classic and Arkham City versions of the Riddler, and for the bane of all Batman sidekicks, Rebirth and Arkham Origins versions of Deathstroke. For a relative scale comparison, here's Cassandra with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man, and as always, here she is with Stealth Iron Man. She looks great with your Batman family, and the wired cape lends itself to some great figure photography and display options. She definitely would have benefited from a couple of alternate hands, but with that cape doing most of the heavy lifting, for playability I'm giving this Batgirl 5 points. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. The figure is a Target exclusive and retails for $22.99. If you haven't figured it out by now, I'm a pretty big fan of Cassandra. In my perfect world, Cassandra would have continued to be Batgirl, Barbara Gordon would have continued to be Oracle, Tim Drake would be the one and only Robin, and Damian wouldn't exist. Or at the very least, just not be Robin. To McFarlane's credit, they did put more thought into this Cassandra Cain than the makers of Birds of Prey. Even so, for price, I'm giving this Batgirl 4 points, averaging out to a grand total of 4.4 out of 5. Sound off in the comments below and tell me where Cassandra Cain ranks for you in the Batman family. Also, while you're down there, make sure that you're subscribed. The next video is going to be my 400th, and believe me, you're not going to want to miss it. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.